fish were placed in the pond. They instantly seemed lively and happy. They energetically swam around, even jumping out of the water every so often. Ripples could be seen on the surface of the water, which seemed to make the pond come alive. The last thing they did was place the fish seeds and shrimp seeds into the pond. Once they had done so, Mickey announced that it was time for them to leave. Everyone begged Mickey to let them take some group pictures and leave them in various places on New Moon Mountain. Before Mickey had a chance to respond to the group, Ink walked over and flashed his teeth. Without a second thought, everybody quickly began to trek down the mountain. While the rest of the group continued toward the bottom of the mountain, Mickey, Zoe, and Flora walked toward Cameron. "Those flowers are absolutely gorgeous," Zoe exclaimed when she reached her brother. "How did you grow them all?" Flora reiterated Zoe's sentiment. "This place is beautiful. I never imagined that you could create such a paradise," she asserted. "Feel free to pick some of them," Cameron offered. "You can take them home and replant them." Flora's eyes lit up, but Zoe quickly shook her head. "We wouldn't have the time to properly care for them. They'd end up dying. It would be incredibly sad," Zoe asserted. "You're right," Flora said to Zoe. Then she turned to Cameron. "Thank you for the offer. I wouldn't want to be responsible for killing the beautiful flowers. We'll just have to come here more often to admire them." What Zoe and Flora didn't know was that as long as the flowers were nourished by the spirit earth or spirit water, they wouldn't die, and they would bloom for an unlimited amount of time. However, without spirit water, they would eventually wither away. As Zoe and Flora continued their walk down the mountain, Mickey turned around to ask Cameron a question. At the same time, Emily shouted to her dad.
"Darn it, hurry up, Dad!"
She commanded. Rather than scold her for how she spoke to him, Cameron turned all of his attention to her. He was certain whatever Mickey had been about to ask wasn't as important as how much his daughter wanted to play with him. Mickey didn't even try to finish his question, which made Zoe and Flora chuckle.
"Why are you taking so long to come back down? I don't want to wait any longer to fly my remote-controlled plane. Mommy said I had to wait for you, so come on."
Emily insisted as she walked up to her dad with her remote-controlled airplane in her hand. I'm coming, Cameron exclaimed. When he reached Emily, he leaned down and scooped her up. He carried her back to the cushion that Jessica was sitting on and opened the remote-controlled airplane box. Flora took a seat on the ground next to Jessica. She watched with respect and amazement. When Zoe walked over, she sat down next to Flora and looked over at both women. "I didn't even know that my brother had this in him. He's become so strong and so amazing," she said. "I like this easygoing, big-hearted Cameron." As Zoe was finishing her statement, the woman heard a voice. It was Mickey shouting from a bit of a distance. "Hello?" he said, clearly to Jessica. He flashed her a smile. Jessica just nodded, and then she quickly turned to Flora and rolled her eyes. Flora dropped her head and slightly covered her face with her hands in an attempt to hide her giggling. Her thoughts quickly returned to Zoe's comment about Cameron, who was beginning to grow on Flora. Although she had been iffy about him in the beginning, she liked how diligently he took care of Emily and Jessica. As the women were talking, Emily ran back over to them. She was giddy and full of energy. She stood right in front of Flora.
"Daddy made all of this for me,"
she stated quite empathetically. Then she turned to Zoe.
"My daddy has always been really powerful."
Finally, she looked over to where Mickey was standing, and she glared at him. When she spoke, her voice became much more serious, even stubborn.
"You don't know how to talk to girls. You should be telling Mommy and me how absolutely beautiful we are. The most beautiful you've ever seen,"
she demanded. Cameron heard everything, and when Emily saw him walk over, she went running to him.
"I was right, Daddy, wasn't I?"
she asked. "Of course you're right," Cameron exclaimed, laughing and gently patting his daughter's shoulder. Emily proudly smirked at Mickey as if she had won a huge debate.
"See, I was right,"
she insisted. Jessica, Flora, Zoe, and even Mickey started to laugh at the dramatic little girl. Cameron stole Emily's attention by telling her that he was ready to play with the remote-controlled airplane. He began to teach her how the remote control worked. Impatiently, she interrupted him and told him that she had known how to use the remote control for quite some time.
"I just want to play with the plane. Can we just play?"
she asked. Emily flipped her hand out, indicating that she wanted Cameron to give her the remote control. Instead, Cameron scooped the little girl up in his arms. She squirmed to get down. All she wanted to do was play with the airplane. When Cameron set Emily back on the ground, he kneeled behind her with his arms on either side of her, where he could easily help her direct the plane. He handed her the remote control, and she immediately sent the plane into the air. She giggled and laughed as she directed the plane until she started having a bit of trouble. The airplane had rolled onto its side and looked like it was going to take a nosedive and fall from the sky.
"Uh-oh,"
Emily mumbled.
"Daddy, help! Save me!"
Cameron quickly took the remote control from Emily. He righted the airplane and steadied it, which overjoyed Emily, who started clapping, laughing, and jumping up and down. Mickey, Zoe, and Flora stayed a little while longer, and then they decided to give Cameron, Jessica, and Emily some more family time. Before they left, though, Zoe reminded Cameron that he needed to be back at the restaurant to help with the cooking. Cameron didn't even look her way. He just responded with a grunt, which Zoe was pretty sure served as confirmation that he would be there. She wasn't 100% certain, but she didn't really think that her brother would let her down. Knowing that, she, Flora, and Mickey headed back to Zoe's car. Emily and Cameron continued to play with the remote-controlled airplane. Jessica stood nearby, observing them and thinking about everything that had happened. She wasn't completely sure what she felt, or what she should feel. In the distance, Cameron could see the area of the mountain where the animals were kept. Although they were quite a distance away, it was easy to see the pigs, cows, and goats all strolling in their individualized areas. There were ducks and ducklings playing at the water's edge, and the chickens, grouped in 3 or 5s, were drinking water. Cameron's gaze fell on the older chickens. He monitored the scene for several minutes, counting the chickens as he watched. There should be 29 chickens. No matter how many times he counted, though, Cameron only saw 27. Something was wrong. Asking Jessica to watch Emily, Cameron walked over to the animals. When Ink, who often accompanied Cameron, saw his owner headed that way, he uncharacteristically tucked his tail between his legs and rushed over to Emily. He snuggled up as close to her as he could. The only time Ink ever acted that way was when he had done something wrong. From where he was, he closely watched Cameron. The first thing Cameron did was glance into the chicken coop, looking to see if there were any chickens laying eggs. That would have explained why he hadn't seen them. There were no chickens inside. He again counted and only came up with 27 chickens. which was still 2 chickens fewer than there should be. Looking back, Cameron noticed Ink. He whistled to him, indicating that Ink should join him. Ink was an obedient dog, so he did as he was asked, though he seemed to do so unhappily. With his tail still tucked, he walked over to Cameron. It was as if Ink was telling on himself. "Did you eat 2 chickens?" Cameron asked. It really didn't matter to Cameron, but New Moon Mountain didn't have that many chickens, so he didn't want Ink to get into the habit of eating them. In response to Cameron's question, Ink seemed to shake his head, indicating that he didn't eat the chickens alone. He looked into the densely wooded area behind him. Cameron wondered if, indeed, there had been someone or something else that had eaten the chickens. Using his innate divine sense of smell, Cameron turned his nose toward the wooded area and picked up the scent of blood. It was fresh blood, for that matter. He wondered if the blood was just from the chickens that had been eaten or there was something else. Heading into the wooded area, Ink, with a guilty look on his face, closely followed Cameron. Just as they got closer to the pond, they heard a pop and splashing sounds. Cameron swung around and saw Emily.
Mommy, mommy!
She was anxiously shouting. Immediately, Cameron realized that Jessica had fallen into the pond. Emily had nearly crashed her remote-controlled plane again. When Jessica had tried to help, the plane had gotten stuck in one of the holly trees around the pond. Reaching for it, she had slipped. Unable to keep her balance, she fell into the water. Jessica knew how to swim, but she hadn't expected the pond to be as deep as it was. The surprise turned to panic, and suddenly, it was as if she had forgotten how to swim. She began slapping the surface of the water with her hands and flailing around. Cameron ran over. He circulated his spiritual energy. His entire body started to float. He tapped the grass and walked forward about 25 feet. As he got to the pond, his feet touched the surface and he walked on top of the water. Walking toward Jessica, he didn't disrupt the water in any way. He didn't cause a single wave or ripple. Normally, if Jessica had seen such an outrageous and unbelievable thing, she would have been in utter shock. Fearing for her own life, all she cared about was having somebody rescue her. So she didn't even blink at the fact that Cameron was walking on water. In mere seconds, Cameron had made it nearly 250 feet, which was only a few feet away from Jessica. Diving into the water, he swam over to Jessica and pulled her to the closest shoreline. Jessica rolled onto her stomach, coughed up a bunch of water, and collapsed, completely exhausted. Cameron leaned down and picked her up. Then he carried her through the holly trees and grass where Emily was waiting with Ink.
Mommy, are you okay?
Emily asked anxiously. She was about to burst into tears. Jessica coughed a few more times before responding. She forced a smile for the benefit of her daughter. "Don't worry, fine, Emmy." She reassured her daughter. Her words were enough to stop her daughter from crying, although tears still glistened in Emily's eyes. Cameron carried Jessica the rest of the way to where her cushion was still on the ground. After he set her down, Emily ran over and sat as close as she could to her mother. Jessica gently put her arm around Emily, rubbing the little girl's arm and head. Cameron sat next to them and just quietly watched the two comfort each other. Emily soon returned to her happy, playful self, and Jessica again wore her beautiful smile. "I had no idea that pond was so deep. Why didn't you tell me?" Jessica asked after turning to Cameron. Cameron tried to remain focused on her face because he was certain that Jessica didn't realize how beautiful and revealing her figure was in her soaking wet clothes, which clung to her every curve. Additionally, her soft pink undergarments could be seen under her sundress, which had a pastel floral design on a white background. Trying his best not to be disrespectful, Cameron kept his eyes locked on Jessica and began to answer her question. Before he had a chance to speak, though, Jessica looked down and realized how much could be seen through her drenched clothes. Her face turned bright red, and her beautiful eyes continued to hold Cameron's gaze. "What are you looking at?" she asked.
Only time will tell. He met back up with Lenny on his way to lunch. "Hey, friend," Lenny said with a smile. Toby playfully hit him on